Well, hi, Isabella. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this. Would you like to talk a little bit about, why MCS interests you? Why would you embark on a PhD focused on multiple chemical sensitivity of all the topics available?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I am an environmental sociologist. And so when I was doing my comprehensive exams, I was doing those exams on chemical pollution and chemical exposures and also reproduction. And so I knew I was like looking for a project that had to do with chemicals. At the time, I was thinking it was going to have to do with like reproductive health and chemicals. And I read Stacey Alimo's book, Bodily Natures, and I came across this chapter that's about MCS. And I just couldn't believe that I'd never heard of this, especially because chemical pollution is such a legacy issue within environmental sociology. And then the second part to that is that my mom has really bad fragrance sensitivities. So there were like these echoes of her experiences and the experiences that I was reading about.
Was it something that your mother had while you were growing up? What was that like? How did it impact your relationship, and what did you think?
Yes, it was just pretty normal. Like we just like didn't buy scented products. For my mom, like she has a headache condition, and so it's like she's pretty much always having a headache. She's in chronic pain with her head, and fragrance is a big trigger for her. But I think it's not the only thing that brings it on. So in terms of our relationship, it's been pretty easy because I don't really like fragrance either. So I just like never worn perfume or done things like that. But I know it's been an issue for her, like in the workplace before. And since I've done this project, like we talk about that more than we did before.
Perhaps you want to share how many years you're into this PhD project and what is the value, do you think?
Well, I'm 3 years into the project at this point, and I am graduating in May. And then I do hope to turn my dissertation into a book. So hopefully that will be disseminated to a wider audience. I think that the value is that there's multiple things happening. There's this strong thread of invisibility that runs through the themes of this illness. The illness itself is invisible, but then it's also the way that our bodies, as a part of nature, are also invisible, and how people can sort of be made invisible by like the state or institutions refusing to deal with them or like give them the support that they need. And then, very obviously, like the invisibility of chemicals in our interactions with one another, the invisibility of the responsibilities that we might have towards each other's health. I don't know that my project is going to change things significantly, but it really brought to the fore this idea like, oh, we might actually have responsibilities for other people's health in a way that's like embedded in our daily lives. There's chemicals in our interactions, in our public spaces, that we're not really doing things about that we're leaving people to manage on their own. But like for people with MCS, they can't manage it on their own. I don't think anyone is effectively managing it on their own, but they can sort of operate under this like fallacy because their body isn't reacting to it in the same way.
I see your work as kind of taking two directions. The first is about the labor that we folks with MCS have to do, the work we have to do, physical and emotional, maybe psychological, I'm not sure, to protect ourselves, to stay safe. And the second part of your work, you talk about the social isolation, the impacts that folks experience because of MCS in the world. So why don't we take a look at the labor? Do you want to talk a little bit about what you mean by the labor that people have to do?
So a lot of times when we talk about labor within sociology, there's like you can look at like domestic labor, you can look at, paid labor, you can look at what's called illness labor. And for MCS, I really think it's like this chemical avoidance that is the labor. Labor is figuring out ways to avoid chemicals in the world and in relationships and in your own space. And I think that it's like this invisible work, and it takes a huge toll on people's lives. Like it takes a toll on them mentally because it's like way more mental effort to be thinking about this stuff all the time. It takes a toll emotionally, especially when you're trying to maybe like recruit other people in your life into these behaviors or into even just like believing that your experience of the world is a real one. And it takes just like a lot of physical labor, a lot of like time and a lot of energy, a lot of like trying out products that you think are going to be safe and then having them actually like maybe you have a reaction to it, and then like there's a waste of money, like there's a waste of your day, like then you're dealing with feeling awful afterwards. One of my respondents, I mean, many of the people I talked to had had professional careers and had done a lot of interesting work, or they had master's degrees or PhDs, like they had been intellectually and professionally like participating in the world. And so she was just telling me about how frustrating and banal it is for her to have to like wash her clothes every morning in the sink because she can find so few pieces of clothing that she could tolerate. So that's just like one tiny example of something that the person who doesn't have chemical sensitivities like fully takes for granted, because it's just such a removal of all your choices, and it's something that gets displaced onto the individual because we aren't creating structures where, you know, all clothes would be safe because cotton wouldn't be treated with pesticides and like it wouldn't have toxic dyes in it. And we wouldn't see, you know, workplaces where people are reacting to their uniforms because like the clothes would just be safe for people to wear. But instead, all that work, it's like not being done at an institutional level. So then it like falls to the individual to do all of that.
Oh, yes. And I'm just nodding away here listening to you. It's so validating. And, I find it quite emotional actually, because I've never heard it put in this kind of language, that this is
Mm.
labor. So many examples come to mind in my own life, my own work. I am a university educator, but I can't be in the classroom anymore. It's been a number of years because of the fragrances. So I used to really enjoy teaching and engaging with students, and that has been really limited. I teach all online, so there is engagement, but it's much, much different. And in terms of the work, like we are, want to do some painting in our home, and it's, things like that. Home renovations are never easy. And in my
Hmm.
relationship with my wife, there's been so much work that's gone into the number of discussions around the products we're going to use as a family. And there's a lot of work. And, one person you wrote about, you interviewed, his name is Miles. He said to you that, quote, coping with multiple chemical sensitivity is like an unpaid full-time job.
Yeah. And it's like this job that's not recognized, certainly by the state, as being work. So just talking to so many people living off like Social Security disability, which is a very small amount of money that you're getting, it acts like anyone who's disabled, they're not having to do work in their lives. And like that work doesn't deserve some sort of compensation. It's like not recognized by our economic system as having value to our
Mhm.
economy, which it absolutely does. It has, you know, value, I think, that goes beyond just the economic. It's like emotional and relational and even like spiritual.
And part of the labor is making our homes safe and free from chemical contamination. And, we know that homes that are safe from chemicals tend to be more expensive than homes that have chemicals. So there's a lot of labor making homes work for us, right? It takes a lot of creativity, energy, and money.
Yes.
When you think back to the interviews you did with folks, any examples come to mind of people doing creative things, working hard to keep their home safe?
One thing I noticed, one woman, her and her husband, I did an interview with both of them, and they invited me inside of their home. And I thought she had a really nice house. I thought it was very comforting and cozy, and she had art on the walls. It was a space I felt very comfortable in. And and she was talking to me about how like this is not like her standard of what her home would look like if it could look like however she wanted it to. And like everything she's found has had to be metal or like certain kinds of wood or like certain things that are off. So I was just like I was very impressed with how nice she still made her home feel, like despite the limitations that were imposed upon her. But I think for her, like emotionally, well, a word she used in our interview a lot was like demeaning. Like, I think it probably feels like demeaning in a sense to be so limited and to not be able to, you know, shape your home to be the way that you would want it to be. I mean, that just feels like a freedom that other people really get to take for granted. I also like I try not to like go on about the aluminum foil stuff too much in my work because I think there are these little things you can like pick out of this illness experience that can be like very exoticizing. And I think that like adds to the stigma of the experience because like there's so much cultural like meaning around the symbol of aluminum foil and like tin hats and like what that means, like, which is that someone must be like psychologically unwell or like dealing with delusions. And like, think I don't think that's true in the case of MCS. And like, I don't think that's the like, impetus for people to put aluminum foil on their walls.
One question that I have in listening to you, Isabella, is, the number of interviews you did and men and women, like rough ages, and where were folks, and how many were roughly done in person and how many online? Just some brief info, please.
Sure. So I did like two like field trips to the Southwest. So I went for a month to a more rural area that I call Juniper in my work. And then I went for about a week to a city that I think I call Desert City in my work. And there I was able to talk to people in person. So I would say I talked to about half of my interviewees, like 15 to 18, like I talked to them in person. And then I had a total of 33. And so then people that I met put me in touch with like, oh, here's my friend, you could talk to them over Zoom. I also went to a couple online support groups to see like what does the support look like, for people with MCS, like what are people with MCS like talking about with each other. And so from there, a lot of the people in the support groups were like, oh, you can talk to me. It was about 2/3 of my interviews were with women and about a third was with men. And then, so I think I talked to 19 women with MCS, 10 men with MCS. And then I also talked to 4 people that were like friends, family, like spouse of a person who had MCS. And I really wanted to do more of those interviews, but it's like, it's really hard to find those people because I really want to talk about like, how do these chemicals get into your social interactions? Like, what kind of work are like a friend or a family member, what does this kind of illness experience like put on them, and like does this change the way they think about chemicals in the world? And then I did feel like it skewed older, the people that I talked to. I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if that has to do also with like where I went. I don't know if maybe like people in their 30s, that I'm sure many people in their 30s are dealing with this, maybe they're not going to the Southwest as much. I don't know. You might know more
Yeah.
than I what that
Well,
looks like.
a couple things come to mind. I mean, I don't know the exact percentages, but I think more people who are older have the illness. And I think a lot of young people just don't know. I think a lot of people in general don't know what they have, right? You mentioned your mom has headaches and people just often don't know. And when you say Southwest of the US, what states are we talking?
Like Arizona and New Mexico.
And let's go back. I want to talk more about housing. And you write about people with MCS who become homeless, who lose their homes
Hmm.
because they can't make their homes safe for different reasons, and the devastating impacts. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the folks you met who were in this predicament?
Sure. Well, so one woman that I spoke to, she considers herself an environmental refugee because she says she's always on the run in her van, and she has a dual citizenship between Canada and the United States. She's like moving between countries to try to outrun this illness, like based on the seasons and based on where she needs to be to get some amount of government assistance. When we talk about people that are unhoused, we often talk about like veterans or like people with mental illness or like LGBTQ kids who like can't live with their parents and don't have anywhere else to go. But I think people who are having chemical sensitivities are like at a high risk, both because of like the chemicals themselves, but like also because of like the lack of social support that we have for people.
And do you think that there's government neglect? Do you think governments in your country, in the US and in other countries, could do more when it comes to housing for people with MCS?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think so. I mean, I think that the government in the United States like is not doing enough at all for housing anyone in terms of people who are unhoused. The whole way like the housing market is set up in the United States is like not really for working class or middle class people to be able to own a home. So there's huge, huge issues with housing. And then certainly that like comes together with like the huge issues we have with chemical regulations and the fact that there's all these known unknowns about chemicals that are out there. Scientists like know that there's all these unknown health risks of the chemicals that are being developed and put out into the world. And then we also like know that black spatulas are not good for your health, or gas stoves are like will give kids asthma. And so we're really playing catch up. And then even then it's like you're only catching these like teeny tiny little pieces of the problem. And then even those teeny tiny pieces of the problem are like getting really politicized because like the environment as an issue is like highly politicized.
And because it's so politicized, I wonder, as a researcher, have you come across any instances of scrutiny or people questioning the validity of your work? You mentioned off the top your mom's experience, right? Did your experience with your mom kind of give you that confidence or that lived experience to know, yeah, this is real, and I'm going to spend 3 years doing this, even if people may roll their eyes at me or second guess me?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up because that is one thing I kind of counter people with where I'm like, okay, even if you don't think like this illness experience is real for whatever reason, there is a lot of scientific evidence about the impacts of fragrance on asthma, about it on headaches, about it on even like people with autism because they have like sensory experiences of the world. So fragrance and chemicals, like they are getting into our relationships with other people. They can have a myriad of, like transmittable health repercussions for other people. That's given me more confidence and more to point to. To me, it's an interesting response for people to have this knee jerk response of like, this can't be real or this isn't real. Like, I find that very intriguing because we do know all this stuff about how bad chemicals are for us. Like, we are basically like running an experiment on the planet on like what's going to happen if we like douse the planet in biotoxins. Like, I don't really understand why people don't hold more space for the fact that like this could very well be a result of that, and like I believe that it is.
And what did some people with MCS whom you spoke with, what, if anything, did they share with you about that denialism?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people told me like that's the worst part of this experience is like not being believed. It really tells you a lot about the significance of that denial. And it's not just coming from like institutions, which yes, like definitely make your life like so much harder when doctors are saying that you don't have this, or when like the government will give you like hardly any disability money because they don't think you need it because like you should be able to work. Well, I imagine and what I've heard is just like having your friends like not be willing to like change their laundry detergent for you. I mean, that's like it's like almost a betrayal. Like you're you're so much more invested in like this chemical reality that we've all kind of socially constructed and been socialized around that like you can't get out of it in order to see that your friend is going through something and that there are things you could do to like help them.
Oh, yes, yes. Okay, so I want to just ask you about the emotional management piece. And you write, quote, there are many interactional dimensions of living with chemical reactivity that necessitate emotion management. And these include withstanding scrutiny from others about what's happening in our own body, having your embodied experiences be dismissed as psychological by the people you're closest to, and needing to explain to other people that choices they think of as deeply private have impacts on your body and well-being. So do you view this as emotional labor?
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely think that it is emotional labor. It's just a lot emotionally to have to like go through something where you have been basically like kicked out of the mainstream world and then to have to do this additional labor with your own emotions and seeing how people have had to like regulate themselves emotionally so that they don't come off as crazy, like so that you can be like seen and believed. And like that's exhausting. Like it's exhausting to not just be able to get mad or get sad or say like the world is betraying me and I have lost trust in the way other people can show up for me.
Well, that's really amazing, really moving, and just incredible to hear about your work. I want to ask you, Isabella, is there anything that surprised you in this work? Anything that you will remember for years and years and years to come?
It was such a surreal experience seeing this whole other world that's out there and the way that people just this is kind of just like the truth about the human spirit is like people will find ways to keep going even in extraordinary circumstances.
So thank you so much for taking time and for all the work you're doing. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been lovely to talk to you.